Hi, welcome to White Guys for Kamala. I'm your host, John Ennis, my co-host, Mowrey, and our guest today had to back out at the last minute because of a veterinarian emergency, and we're sending our best
Thoughts
wishes
and
to
prayers.
thoughts and prayers to his cat, and we'll see if I can reschedule with Cliff at another time. But since we're here and we have a slideshow of today's news, I thought we would just go ahead anyway. So,
Let's get
um,
into it.
our opening thought today will be about pride. Um, Pride is one of those things that sounds good, and it could also be kind of negative. And as I looked up a paper that somebody wrote on authentic and hubristic pride, differential relations to aspects of goal regulation, affect, and self-control by Charles S. Carver and Sherry L. Johnson, I realized that there's big differences in different types of pride. So there's authentic pride versus hubristic pride. And the research from the University of Sydney found that hubristic pride correlates with arrogance and self-aggrandizement. It promotes prejudice and discrimination, whereas authentic pride is associated with self-confidence and accomplishment and promotes more positive attitudes toward other groups and stigmatized individuals. And I just think it's so interesting whenever we pick up one of these values that are like universal and as soon as we start to get into it, the negative side of that trait is always immediately relatable to the movement that we are trying to campaign against right now. But to read a little bit from this paper, which had a couple good points. Um, the nature of one's goals, however, appears to differ by the type of pride assessed. Tracy and her colleagues argued that authentic pride, but not hubristic pride, is linked to achievement, accomplishment, confidence, productivity, and self-worth. This suggests an approach to life in which intrinsic involvement guides behavior. If so, tendencies toward authentic pride should also be related to higher levels of traits such as valuing the activities that make up one's life and taking up new goals when previous goal-directed efforts prove not to be successful. In contrast, there is indirect evidence suggesting a link between hubristic pride and the pursuit of goals so as to attain acknowledgement from others. That is, hubristic pride has been linked to a hierarchical dominance orientation in which status depends on social validation. That dominance orientation, in turn, has been related to extrinsic goal pursuit. Given such an approach to goals, we hypothesize that hubristic pride will also release to the tendency to set unrealistically ambitious, extrinsically motivated goals, because goal pursuit has the purpose of obtaining others' acknowledgement, and because self-esteem based on such considerations is fragile, we hypothesize that persons high in hubristic pride will tend to overgeneralize from both successes and failures. Success will be taken to mean the sky is the limit, particularly with regard to social standing. Failure will be taken to mean disaster. Such a pattern would be consistent with the connection between hubristic pride and the tendency to make global attributions for success. Indeed, recent findings indicate that hubristic pride relates to higher levels of aggression, whereas authentic pride relates to lower levels of aggression.
Well, it's sort of
Um,
like the seven deadly sins. I mean, the idea of like pride being, one or the notion that pride comes before the fall. I think certainly there's obviously everyone I think needs to feel some level of self-confidence. Everyone needs to feel some degree of self-worth and self-love, and taking pride in one's work and taking, being proud of one's own accomplishments or being proud of a loved one's accomplishments. But to me, it's also interesting how easy that word is to hide really negative things behind.
mhm,
Obviously you
mhm.
think about like, white pride,
Yeah.
movement, this idea of the like, oh, well, we can, really what we like and what we're proud of, quote unquote, is this sort of systematic, uh, you know, um, forcing of others into a lower situation, whether it's through slavery or whether it's through systemic racism, and creating these systems that obviously are created either intentionally or unintentionally to oppress other people, the idea of being proud of that, of being proud of, you know, Civil War leaders that were specifically trying to create a system that was based in slavery and oppressing other people, and the idea that like we need to be proud of our history, we need to be proud of that. The idea of hiding all of these qualities behind that word as though, oh, I just have, you know, white pride or whatever, is so interesting to me because obviously you compare that to say the idea of a group that has been historically maligned, like, you know, in June we have Pride, you know, Gay Pride Month, you know, and this idea that I don't see that as being, there's nothing wrong with that to me, but that's also because that's a group we're trying to lift up because historically they have been, you know, obviously treated horrifically. And, you know, with that, I think there's elements of pride that are positive in that. But it's just interesting how, if you just, you know, how easy it is, how easy that word can be manipulated to basically, you know, make every negative quality be something that needs to be celebrated because it's part of who you are, kind of a thing, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and that definition really spoke to me when thinking about how white men are too often struggling with the sense of pride or trying to find a purpose. And I feel like because we've grown up with a white male-centered culture in so many ways, that being part of the default culture was something you could be proud of, just sort of like, hey, I just happen to live on top of the hill. I'll just take that as something that's special for me and identify myself because of that. And so as let's say since the 60s when popular culture and TV started to feature other people that weren't white males and started and weren't always, you know, fathers knows best types. Um, there's been a gradual, and this is what a lot of the MAGA movement is about, there's been a gradual sense of losing our country or it's
Right,
not really ours anymore. What happened? And so you'll hear
right,
people say that about why they want to, you know, in the MAGA movement about why they want to go back or what they think is, you know, what they think when America was great.
right,
And it really is a white grievance that I don't think they're even able to really put their vocabulary around. You know, it's
right.
just a sense of being like, but it's not about me anymore. And moreover, like other people are being celebrated, and this is like, you know, progress as we would define it, and it's long overdue, and it feels good to, and it's also more entertaining to see not just the same
Yeah.
couple of white guys doing the same couple of jokes over and over again, but um, you know, I think we need to find a way to start to treat white men like their own demographic, like they're like we would if you're like, oh, we need gay programming, you know, we need
Right.
programming where we
Yeah.
feature more Asians. We need something that's for white men, but it's like in a place where it's not like it's the default mainstream. That feels like a niche where they feel like, oh, now I feel seen. Now I feel represented. You know, they're
Right.
talking about dumb guy stuff, and it's not just sports or, you know, or Fox News. And so, um, and that, you know, when we talk about pride, both authentic and hubristic, you know, that's really, you know, one of the more on the nose kinds of descriptions of the kinds of men that we're seeing fall prey to MAGA. You know, this
Right.
sense of like, well, I don't know what to be proud of anymore, but I can sink all my chips in that guy who's loud, who's already rich, and who's flaunting the law. And apparently gets away with sleeping with porn stars and cheating on his wives and has no shame about it. You know, I'm just going to push all my chips into that corner and have that be my identity. And then when they attack him, I feel attacked. I feel victimized. And so when
Right.
we wonder why pointing out these normally really repellent flaws aren't having more of an impact on driving people away, it's because they're not thinking in any judicious sense of like, well, who's going to be a better leader? Who's going to make me proud of my country or my family? They're thinking all from like this avatar, this mascot of what it is that they wished or sh they should be doing or could be doing.
Yeah, I think that's true for, certainly the people that are obsessed with the culture war issues or just feel, like we've talked about in the past, like, they have lots of things that they feel upset about. But it feels like we're just bugs heading to the bug zapper with Trump. You know what I mean?
That's a good way to put it. And I think in this clip, I was talking about last week about how I've never seen so many party defections on either side before. I don't think that's ever been a thing where someone's like, I'm switching into this. It was always like, well, I grew into Republican when I had to pay property taxes or something like that, or there was like violent crime or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
I've never seen so many mass defections from Republicans, both anecdotally and then in public like this. So in this clip, this is from today, Liz Cheney talking at Kamala Harris
About the
rally.
stakes. Many people in the room here are undecided voters. What's kind of the last pitch that you would make about why this election's so important and why you believe they should vote for the vice president here?
Well, I think that in this election, and especially here in Pennsylvania, we have the opportunity to tell the whole world who we are. And we have the chance to say, we're going to reject cruelty. We're going to reject the kind of vile vitriol that we've seen from Donald Trump. We're going to reject the misogyny that we've seen from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And we have the chance in this race to elect somebody who is going to defend the rule of law. Vice President Harris is going to defend our Constitution. We have the chance to remind people that we are a good country. We are a good and honorable people. We are a great nation. And in this race, we have the opportunity to vote for and support somebody you can count on. We're not always going to agree, but I know Vice President Harris will always do what she believes is right for this country. She has a sincere heart, and that's why I'm honored to be here and supporting her in this race.
I mean, exactly. Listen, so in my career as a prosecutor, you've heard me say this, I never, ever asked a victim or a witness, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Never. It wouldn't even occur to me to ask that. I did every time ask, are you okay? And and I feel very strongly that, for example, on the issue of partisanship, yes, we're going to have disagreements, but I actively invite good ideas from wherever they come. That's why I'm going to have a Republican in my cabinet, by the way. Because I want good ideas. And by the way, I know it is in our best interest as a nation, in the interest of our strength and our future as a nation. We need a healthy two-party system. We need a healthy two-party system. We need to be able to have these good, intense debates about issues that are grounded in fact. About that.
Imagine.
Let's start there.
I thought you did a really good across the aisle appeal there, and that's quite an antidote to the demonization that you're getting from the Trump campaign and their last desperate throes, which I don't think is helping bring in any more voters. I think his decline, I mean, he has a visible mental decline, but also his character is just on a downward spiral. And I don't think referring to people as the enemy within when talking to Americans or threatening to round up people who disagree with you and throw them in jail. I don't think that's bringing in like moderates. I don't think that's winning over independents. I don't think that's going to win women in the suburbs, which is a key demographic towards deciding the election. And so, it's a big difference to see these kinds of closing messages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been interesting, I think, to see, obviously, I'm always hesitant to go down too much down the path of like mental decline because I just think it's a slippery slope, obviously, but I mean, it is alarming to watch
Yeah.
him, to
Yeah.
see him. I mean, obviously the dancing, the 40 minutes of
40
music.
minutes of just
Um,
swaying like he's not even there. Yeah.
yeah, like
That
just
that should have been the
like
biggest alarm.
it feels like what's crazy is that like I wish I had a crystal ball because it's these things that like God willing Kamala wins and we can look back and be like, man, it was not towards the end it was as though he didn't even care about winning. Like he was like I give up and just was like kind of nothing mattered to him anymore. I mean, the idea that like his behavior lately to me has felt like if he hasn't given up, then I cannot imagine this should not scare a lot of people that were planning on voting for him. You know what I mean? Like the people that weren't the true believer MAGA people, like those that the people that can say to see the way he is at these in these last couple of weeks and say like I'm still okay with it. Nothing bothers me. Nothing. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I was nervous when I watched Joe Biden debate. I was like, look,
Sure.
I think he's
Yeah.
still a good man. I think, I still believe in I'm not worried that he can't make it to the end of his presidency, but I was like, okay, this is potentially the beginning of a second term and I'm getting nervous more so than I was 4 years ago at the idea of this, man. And it's just interesting to be like, if I allow myself that kind of honesty, I can't imagine that the people that are already, I would hope, holding their nose to vote for this man anyway, wouldn't be like, you know what? This is alarming. He is showing like Mad King tendencies, like you think about
Yeah.
like that Game of Thrones Mad King burn them all type of thing. Like that's the vibe I'm getting from him in these last few weeks. And I'm not
Yeah.
saying that to make a soundbite that, like that
No.
that is I feel like a sincere concern that isn't just for the sake of calling the other side demented and all those
Right.
things. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. No.
real.
And the Arnold Palmer remark, which got a lot of coverage over the weekend, that's been pointed out as, in dementia, patients start to lose that check on things that you're saying in your mouth, that come out of your mouth, and they become more vulgar and they think it's funny. And there's no oversight to what you're saying anymore. And the fact that he can't even make a complete sentence paragraph anymore. He can't continue a thought for more than 30 seconds or so. And I think honestly that's why you see his crowds dwindling. And I know this is like another talking point that sounds like it's supposed to be echoing a debate from that Kamala raised during the debate, but they've gotten pretty small. They've gotten into like half the size. They'll take up half the space that's available and move everything halfway to the high school gym or the
Well, and
conference center.
that's why they're having him go to, California where he doesn't have a chance of winning, but he's there because people haven't seen him there before, so maybe the crowds will show up. They're
Yeah,
getting him
yeah.
into New York because they're like, "Oh, well, we haven't been there 20 times and we've got to make sure that this guy still feels like there's energy and everybody's excited for him." Like but what's crazy to me is that like you're not, even though you're seeing that in the real time with these, dwindling crowd sizes and stuff, I don't know if you're seeing it necessarily in the polls, which again is maybe one more reason that we just should not put that much faith in the polls and in terms of who they're speaking with.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say this though, I did some phone banking over the weekend, and this was in Pennsylvania, and I was like, these people are tired of politics, and
Yeah,
and I think rightfully so. And yet, I still spoke to a few people that were like, okay, when is it? When am I supposed to vote?
wow.
And it was as though they hadn't been reached already, and they hadn't been, and so it made me feel like, okay, well, there's a point to me doing this because
Yeah,
there was
that's
a
great
lot
to
of
hear.
people that
Yeah.
were, yeah. So there's the hope of like, well, maybe that person, I really will, help get them to the polls to vote, but I mean, it's very difficult to imagine that, obviously the idea of an undecided voter is crazy to me. I think the undecided voter isn't really undecided. They're undecided only in that they have left themselves room to say, but I really won't know until I press the button,
Yeah.
But I feel like that's like me saying I'm undecided if I'm going to see a movie this weekend. It's like, yeah, I mean, I might not want to the hour before I was supposed to head out and go see the movie, but I know I want to see the movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
anything can happen, but
Yeah, but you probably know what movie you're going to see. That's
right. Yeah.
yeah. So
exactly. Yeah.
yeah. After our podcast last week, and our guest Sarah Kate Levy spoke about how phone banking was an effective way to make a difference. I phone banked for the DNC and talked to voters in Arizona, and the ones I spoke with, because the app only connects you when they answer the phone.
Right.
Most of those people were already voting for Kamala or had already voted because the ballots had just gone out this past week. And yeah, they were over it. They were like, I'll save you the time. You don't got to give me the speech. I've got the hat. We got the yard sign. Thanks. And I only spoke to one Trump voter out of all of the calls I made. And a couple people hung up on me, but that's, I've hung up on people who cold called me before, that doesn't really
Sure.
mean anything either way. And so, last week, Kamala Harris did a sit-down interview with Bret Baier, and by going into the lion's den of Fox News and to talk to somebody who's arguably not really a journalist, he's definitely much more of a Trump campaign advocate, as this interview showed. She not only was able to handle herself and not lose her composure in talking to him, but a lot of people who watched his aggressive and combative style of asking questions and not letting her respond realized, how bad it sort of made their side look. And a number of people, again, anecdotally, have been saying how this really changed their mind on Kamala and they realize, of course, that, Trump would never do this. Trump would never go talk to a hostile interviewer who, he gets mad at being fact checked. He wanted to be able to take CBS off the air because he's mad at 60 Minutes because they were going to fact check him if he did an interview with him. Like, this is the level of grievance that he's on. So we'll watch a clip of the just really the opening, really just the first 2 minutes told you exactly the kind of clown show this interview is going to be.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration, because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you,
now,
just a number, do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have
it's a
an
rough
immigration
estimate of
system
6 million people
that
have been
needs to be-
released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question, I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And when you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the Chips and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the. Yes, ma'am.
May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish.
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and they
in the
didn't
middle
bring up
of
that
responding to the point you're raising,
Okay.
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
So many women can relate to being talked over by a man. I don't know that anyone's had to be in as combative and accusatory a situation as that, because that's so over the top, where he's like, well, here's the first question, and then he's already like asking the next question while she's trying to answer and interrupt her.
He wanted to essentially ask the question and then make a point in the middle of asking his question, like, or ask his question, get a little bit of info, but that he felt, oh, well, what you just said just now furthers what I'm about to say, which is that, and it's like, Bret, you're not having that kind of a conversation. You're not trying, you shouldn't have gone into this with the idea of like, I am going to prove you wrong in all of these things. I'm going to show how you'd made all these mistakes and confront you with them. It's like, you're at the very least, you're supposed to frame those confrontations as a question and then wait for them to respond.
And a lot of those questions were like, how long have you been beating your wife?
Right.
They were such leading, like, so how bad do you feel for all this pain that you caused all these people? Like a little bad, a lot bad, really, 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 really bad, and it's so naked is the problem. So, he's not winning over anyone by trying to be really aggressive for people who want him to be unfair to her, and it was acknowledged that he was doing this basically for his Twitter feed. And he had to apologize the next day because she called him out immediately for showing the wrong clip when he said, like, well, he wasn't talking about this here. And to have to be like that teacher where she's like, I'm trying to say something, you're gonna have to listen to me now. He looked chagrined, and so that's why he's a man making men look bad, is because he's talking over the knowledgeable person. He's doing a bad job at the job he's supposed to do, and he's failing at his very naked partisan agenda. It's not even like you can ask a trap question where you know what the answer is going to be and say, but that's not what you said before. It's not like, you're watching a courtroom drama where the lawyer's like, expertly guiding the witness down a path where you're going to say like, but you said you weren't there that night. It's not.
Right. It's kind of crazy that the idea of like her going into the lion's den, as so many people have said, versus him going into the lion's den. Like, I don't believe that the person who would interview Trump would have behaved the way Bret Baier behaved to Kamala. To me,
absolutely.
Again,
Yeah. It's so disrespectful and it's unprofessional and it doesn't help. And it also shows why not just Kamala, but both candidates have been going on so many podcasts, because it's not only that there's frankly a larger audience on some of these podcasts, not ours, of course, but that podcasts are really for the chit chat, they're really for the talky talk, tell me more. There's no sense of like, oh, we got to go to commercial. We have to like choreograph this question and this answer. And that's why so many more people are listening to those podcasts instead of getting it, their candid experiences from the news, trying to grill someone in a 3 to 5 minute segment. So, yeah, it's been really insightful. So now moving along into Don't Be That Guy, I wanted to bring this up because it's very much the issue right now. I would say, and this is sort of the biggest thing to Don't Be That Guy. Don't be that guy who's so easily won over by the Trump bro whispering that's been picking off a disproportionate number of young men. And this is a big reason why we started doing this podcast, was because we realized that there's really no answer to the toxic male influencers on the right. John Della Volpe, who is the director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics. He runs a research firm that conducted polls for a PAC supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris campaigns. So recent data from the Harvard Youth Poll, a national survey I oversee for the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics, reveals an increasing political rift between young men and women under 30, two groups critical to Democrat success in recent elections. Almost exactly equal shares of young men and young women say they will definitely vote in this election or have already done so. But since the spring of 2020, the share of young men identifying as registered Democrats has dropped by 7 percentage points, while those identifying as Republicans have increased by 7 points, a net shift of 14 points in just 4 years. Young women during the same period shifted 2 points away from the Republicans. Today's young men are lonelier than ever and have inherited a world rife with skepticism toward the institutions designed to promote and defend American ideals. Men under 30 are nearly twice as likely to be single as women their same age. Gen Z men are less likely to enroll in college or the workforce than previous generations. They have higher rates of suicide and are less likely than their female peers to receive treatment for mental health maladies. Most young men in my polling say they fear for our country's future, and nearly half doubt their cohort's ability to meet our nation's coming challenges. Mr. Trump has tapped these anxieties by weaving a hyper-masculine message of strength and defiance into his broader narrative that undermines confidence in democratic institutions. And it's working. Aware that boasting about killing Roe v. Wade drove away young women, Mr. Trump zeroed in on capturing a larger share of the young male vote. In 4 years, he cut what was once a 19 percentage point Democratic margin among registered young male voters, roughly in half. His playbook? A master class in bro whispering, championing crypto, securing the endorsement of Dave Portnoy, the unapologetically offensive founder of Barstool Sports, and giving UFC president Dana White, who embodies the alpha male archetype that appeals to many young men, a prime spot at the Republican National Convention. Mr. Trump has also cultivated relationships with simpatico comedians, pranksters, influencers, and Silicon Valley billionaires like Elon Musk, all while his team bombards podcasts and social media with misinformation and memes to rally his troops. This shift in support for Mr. Trump among men is neither organic nor unexpected. It's what happens when a well-coordinated political operation invests tens of millions of dollars to amplify Mr. Trump's narrative and weaken confidence in the party in power. Compared with when Mr. Trump ran in 2020, young male voters are now less likely to support government-backed climate change solutions, down 15 points, and affirmative action for qualified candidates, down 8 points. They're more likely to question immigration policy, up 12 points, free trade, up 10 points, and whether government stimulus leads to economic growth, up 7 points. They are also more likely to believe that religious values should play a more important role in government, up 6 points. Jumping ahead, to win more votes from young men, Ms. Harris must address their fears head on and present a bold vision that speaks to their desire for purpose and strength. Of course, a clear economic vision that charts a pathway to financial independence is paramount, but it may not be enough to counter Mr. Trump's appeal on this issue in the closing days. Ms. Harris needs to go big. Here's one way. To reignite the hope of the emerging generation, Ms. Harris should make a sweeping national call to both military and civilian service, namely the Generation Z Compact to rebuild and renew America. Such a plan would offer a sense of identity, community, and patriotism while providing economic stability and skill building, things many young men feel they are missing. And he goes on to point to the FDR's New Deal Civilian Conservation Corps in 1933, JFK's Peace Corps in 61, President Bill Clinton's AmeriCorps in 93, and he talks about how framing national service as a pathway to rebuilding America's strength from within and addressing growing concerns can bridge political divides with a renewed sense of shared responsibility. So countering that narrative by listening and recognizing young men's fears can offer something more profound, a vision of hope, strength, and shared purpose. And so this is very much this makes sense, and this totally scans with my cursory perception of seeing how the devolved male um, exchanges online. It seems like as men are getting older, they're still stuck in like this adolescent frame of mind. And that's what's been so disconcerting. And that's why it's not necessarily surprising to see so many guys who act dumb and think it's funny to act dumb support Trump. And they really are old enough to already be, paying a mortgage and having kids. And so this is a really worrisome trend. And so Keith Edwards, who's a political strategist, who was on Threads earlier today talking about this issue, I think in response to this column. And he might not have worded his concerns as eloquently as John Della Volpe, the director of polling at the Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics. And he was met with a lot of scorn and online backlash for even broaching this. He was accused of centering white male concerns at a time when we're trying to bring in so many more people and raise awareness to it. And I think what was lost in what he was trying to convey is that this is a problem of young men. This is like an 18 to 30 demographic that we're talking about here that's broken significantly for Trump. Like that age group now will go for Trump, and this isn't something that when we were growing up, it was always younger people were more liberal, more open-minded. They rejected the intolerance and the busybodies of Republicans who wanted to try to restrain their sexual freedoms. And so this is a really big concern, and it's not going to go away until we find ways to confront it. And I think part of what the online pile-on was unaware of is that this is really something that men should be confronting. This isn't something that, like, oh, women, you have to coddle these young men now, and you have to like hear their feelings about why they feel picked on because they don't see themselves enough on TV. I don't think that women have to have any say in this. I don't think they have to, worry about picking up the slack on this. This is absolutely something that men have to find a way to set the example for and help elevate our cultural standards to be something that younger men can aspire to.
Absolutely. I think that, we've got to get to a place where we take care of our own people to some degree in terms of like, it's unfair to put so much pressure on, Black women to save our country every 4 years, and
Yep.
It's certainly all of the people that, have that are sort of counted on to vote Democrat, like, it's not up to those people to not only vote for the right candidate and get them elected, but then also educate us and figure out a way to help us be better ourselves. Sometimes we need to like look introspectively and say, no, I mean, that's precisely why you and I started this podcast, is
Yep.
to hopefully reach out to people that are like us
Yep.
in terms of just the surface and say, this is an alternative to that. It doesn't have to be, I think that sometimes, again, this goes back to what we were saying earlier, where it's like, that's not for me. Sometimes you need to say like, okay, this is for you though. This is who we're reaching out to. We didn't make this podcast hoping that a lot of women would listen to it and be like, I'm going to vote for Kamala. We're not here hoping to turn a bunch of, Latino voters to voting for Kamala. Like, we're here because the people that we're speaking to, the people who we have any kind of authority in terms of what we're saying, are the people that share a similar experience to us. And so for me, I feel like, there needs to be that lane. Certainly it shouldn't be the only lane, and it probably shouldn't be the primary lane that we're discussing, but certainly when it represents a vast and large amount of people, and in an election where it's going to be decided by less than a vast and large amount of people, yes, there needs to be someone who is reaching out and recognizing those things. To not recognize those things, to, in order to, placate and make everything focused on a more important issue or a more important, voice, to me is short-sighted,
Yeah. And I think that, in order to get these young men to care, I mean, first of all, we have to understand that, the frontal lobe is still developing in people until the age of 25. So you're really talking about 25 to 30 is when people can really, young men can really start to like develop that sense of self and social awareness and use their critical thinking. And so um, to appeal to them and to say, well, what about, you should have empathy for your mother or your sister or your daughter. I think they have to know that they're cared for first before they're even going to listen to that.
Right.
And that's something that, we've had the ability of growing up into this if we didn't already have that awareness. And this is very much an issue that other men older than 30, should have already dealt with. And so when we talk about winning them over, this is, we're going to try with facts. We're going to try to understand like where they went wrong. But knowing what we know now, just from the course of doing this podcast about how men are, as boys were raised specifically to not show emotion, to look for ways to push down on others, all these really negative things that you have to unlearn when you become a man. And you're like, okay, I feel okay being a man now. I don't have to worry about other guys at school picking on me. I'm not in school anymore, but I do have to find ways for people to like me. And I do have to realize that insulting women or being negative to them isn't going to get me any dates. And so, setting up this sort of avenue towards a younger generation of males is something that, it's, we're certainly trying to throw a lifeline out by this podcast, but it's going to be something that's like an ongoing effort. And I think it's a different kind
it's
of
a cultural
shift.
thing. It's a cultural thing. Yeah. Because ultimately, we're talking about pride, and so much of the grievance comes from a sense of wounded pride, a sense of like, I liked feeling like I was the king of the hill, and so this idea that like, that you have to share space and make space for many other people that might make you feel awkward or might make you feel uncomfortable. This idea that it's like, you need to change. No one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear, no,
Right.
man, it's not the world that needs to change. It is you that needs to change. No one wants to hear that. And so it's like, the sad thing is that when you're a demographic that is so used to sort of a status quo that fits kind of your worldview, but you're told you need to change, basically it's like you got to figure out some way to do it with a little bit of sugar, figure out some way to like make it okay. Because basically what I've kind of come to the conclusion of, especially over the last, 8 years, is you cannot change anyone's mind. The best you can do is give them permission to change their own minds.
Yes.
Because they will not, people see having their mind changed by someone else as losing something, losing a contest, losing a battle, losing whatever. And so no one is ever going to leave a conversation unless it's in good faith. And I feel like lately, and certainly as we've seen, on Fox News with Bret Baier and Kamala, like, you're not really going to have a good faith, conversation or debate or argument that is respectful on both sides and both people are listening and people are in it with an open mind. You're only going to find people that are hoping to score points and hoping to win. They're not having a conversation to learn; they're having a conversation to win. And so those people, you cannot. I just feel like you cannot convince them that they're wrong. You can just plant a seed that they can later see and say, I was wrong. Like you hear about like Jerry Seinfeld saying, I was wrong about the woke culture is destroying comedy and all that stuff. And to me, that's like, I don't know if that came from an argument that he had with somebody and eventually he arrived at that, but it felt to me more like, and I think it was great that he said what he said about that. But to me, it felt like he came to that conclusion and someone gave him permission for him to say, I'm changing my mind. No one changed my mind. I've changed it.
Yes.
And so that's all I feel like I try to do when I talk to people or when, in this podcast is we just want to give people the opportunity to decide for themselves and hopefully decide to be more positive and to leave these toxic traits behind, you know, because they're not going to do it because we've lectured them. They're going to do it because we've given them something that allows the idea to blossom in their own mind, you know?
Right. And that's what Kamala was talking about at the end of the clip with Liz Cheney, was that we at least need to have facts that we can agree on as a starting point.
Yeah.
And so as much as we want to lay that out there, that is going to be one of the baselines of having that kind of connection, is like, well, you can't just say that, you know, that's not true. You can't just keep like making things up like Bret Baier does and talk over someone while they're trying to respond and give you that sort of truth. You know, it's very clear he doesn't want that truth from her. You know, he doesn't want her to be able to mention all the things that the Biden administration accomplished, that it isn't all so bad. It isn't trying to undermine America. You know, that takes away from his business model, as he refers to it in texts after the, as we learned, after the Dominion voting lawsuit, which ended up costing Fox News $787 million for lying. So to give us hope to that, here's a video that of a guy, Chris D. Mowrey, as our white guy of the week, a video of him on TikTok. And this is where you will have hope for the younger generation.
It's not cool to be a young, straight, white dude and be red-pilled on the internet. Like, it's not cool to own the libs just to own the libs. The worst trend right now in politics is that young, straight, white males are swaying conservative because to your boys, it's cool to own the libs, even if you have no idea what you're actually talking about. Harry and I are in North Carolina. We were doing in-person debates at NC State's campus, and we got swarmed by like 20 frat dudes. We had to end the live early. All these dudes look exactly the same. They're wearing like the same polo shirt, just chirping. They didn't know any like
Identical.
They didn't know any legislation at all.
I think the funniest moment of those debates was when Chris was talking to this guy who was like really nice, really good faith, and this other dude along with his boys was sitting up there chirping at Chris, and Chris just turns to him and says, "Hey, you right there." And he's like, "Me? You? Do you know anything? Can you name any policy that Donald Trump passed through Congress?" And he like froze.
All Harry was debating, all of these kids, they would never actually come debate him. They'd all just chirp, chirp, chirp. It's not cool in America, coming from two straight white dudes, to do this. It's not cool to just own the libs. You should be on the right side of history and like care about the fact that your mom and your sister deserve good health care in America. Vote for Kamala Harris. Don't do this. Your boys don't like you because you do this. You're actually like a real man in America if you go up to your boys and you're like, yo, why are you voting for the sexual abuser? That's like way more cool and like manly than like whatever the fuck this is.
Yeah, man. If you care for your sister, your mother, your wife, your daughter, your fiance, whoever, that's manly. That's cool. That's being a normal human being.
Exactly. Well said. Vote for Kamala Harris.
All right.
They put us out of business there, dude.
There you go.
Yeah. So, and it's very reassuring to see this, and also, you know, other people talking out and having to actually articulate for the first time, what does manliness really mean? What does it mean to be masculine? And you know, David Hogg appeared on Real Time with Bill Maher. Unfortunately, Bill Maher was not talking. And he was able to say, this isn't an attack on masculinity. This is about, you know, the fact that, you know, we're taking things that, you know, are misleading young men into this direction at a time where there's an epidemic of loneliness, and it's really a mental health problem and a mental health epidemic that we're confronting here. And they're being marketed online as, this is what makes you masculine, guns, you know, using this, you know, these are actual products that you can buy now. And so it's a financial motivation to try to sell masculinity to young men that have no other idea of what it is. And in that same conversation, Joe Scarborough is on there saying, you know, it's unfortunate that we've reached a point in our society where like younger men, boys who are just showing up to school, coming of age on their own, they're seeing that they have the thousands of years of patriarchy suppression projected onto them as if they've done something, and they're still in school. They don't even know what the hell they're doing yet. They're not grown-ups. And so when you put someone in a corner and make them feel responsible for that, like they're going to come out in a way that's more aggressive and defensive based out of that fear and alienation. And that's what sends young men into the MAGA world is like, well, they were already against me. They already made me feel bad for stuff I didn't do. So they're crazy. So I don't have to listen to them, but I am with other white men. So then I must be on the right team. And
Right.
it's unfortunately what we saw in the pile-on that happened when Keith Edwards earlier today trying to raise these issues. It was that knee-jerk anger, which you brought up on the last episode, and that kind of outrage and that like I'm not even going to read this whole thread. I'm just going to say how bad you are, and I'm going to unfollow you and block you. And how could this guy do this? And you must be, this is being divided by Russia, and a lot of this bad faith sort of response at a time where when we're talking about like why we need to address these issues, that's like everything we don't want to do. We don't want to try to put people down for raising these concerns. We don't want to say it doesn't happen. We don't want to say like if they don't understand empathy for women, it's on them. It's like no, we still got to win them over somehow, and they're around for another like 30, 40 years. So you want to do this now and get them on our side and not just wipe your hands because we're mad and we're online and we feel empowered by other people, liking and retweeting what we're saying. And so
Yeah. No, so true.
so, so that'll be our show for this week. And once again, we are doing this as a fundraising effort, hopefully for the Kamala Harris campaign. And you can donate to the White Dudes for Harris link, which is secure.actblue.com/donate/white dudes. And we'll be back next week talking to someone who's very adept at talking this language, I think. So thanks for making the time, and we'll see you next week.